Go. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Allison McKay, and I'm an attorney with Disability Rights Ohio. This is the fourth video in our Facebook Live series that provides an overview of how Disability Rights Ohio advocates for children with disabilities. And today we are discussing access to developmental disability services. If you'd like to follow along with our video, we will have posted a copy of our PowerPoint in the on our website and also on the comments feed of this video. Captioning of the video will also be available within the next business day. On our website, you can also find copies of our prior videos and PowerPoints that provide an overview of how our office advocates for parents in an educational setting, how children can access healthcare, and an overview of Disability Rights Ohio and the Client Assistance Program. Please know that Disability Rights Ohio is providing this video as an informational resource, and we are not providing legal advice. And you are welcome to comment or ask questions throughout this video, and we will do our best to respond either during the session or afterward. We ask that you not provide confidential information like your child's name in the comment box. If you have questions about a specific situation, you are welcome to contact our office's intake department. So let me introduce you to our presenters today. Virginia Wilson is an attorney at Disability Rights Ohio, and she has been with us for over 17 years. She is the team leader for our intake and short-term assistance team. Kevin Truitt is an attorney who has been working with Disability Rights Ohio for over 12 years, and he is the team leader for our community integration team. And both Kevin and Virginia have years of experience helping families navigate the developmental disability system in Ohio. Before I hand it over, let me provide you a little bit of information about Disability Rights Ohio. So we are the state's protection and advocacy system and client assistance program. We are a nonprofit corporation, formerly known as Ohio Legal Rights Service. And our mission is to advocate for the human, civil, and legal rights of people with disabilities in Ohio. In order to be eligible for our services, you must be a person with a disability. There are no income requirements, and our clients are not charged for our services. So if you seek help or help on behalf of someone else, you are welcome to contact our intake department. And on our slides, we have our contact information. Our phone number is 1-800-9181 and press option 2 for intake. And our website is www.disabilityrightsohio.org. And I will mention that on the self-advocacy resources page of our website, we have several resources, frequently asked questions, and fact sheets that cover developmental disability services and Medicaid waiver services. So please use that as a resource as well. Again, today we will be talking about services for children in the developmental disability system, including eligibility, Medicaid waiver programs, and waiting lists for Medicaid waiver programs. So at this point, I will hand it over to Virginia Wilson.
Hi, I'm here to talk about eligibility for County Board of Developmental Disability Services, which I'm going to call the County Board of DD. County Board of DD services are provided to eligible kids and adults that have developmental disabilities. In order to access services from the County Board of DD, you must apply to the County Board of DD in the county where you live. Every county in Ohio, we have 88 counties, everyone has a designated County Board of DD. They are, what kinds of services can county boards of DD provide? Well, first of all, they provide assessments, service planning, coordination, which is kind of like case management, both to adults and to children with developmental disabilities. They also provide oversight and assistance to providers of services for people with disabilities. On our slides, you will see a link to DODD's list of county boards. So all the contact information that you would need to apply or contact your county board in your county where you live is on there as well. Okay, so who's eligible for DD services? In order to be eligible for DD services, you must obviously, I've already said this, live in the county where you're applying, have a qualifying developmental disability, and we'll talk about what that is in a few minutes. You cannot have a sole diagnosis of mental illness or mental health condition. If you have a mental health condition, that doesn't mean you're not eligible for county board services, but you would have to have a qualifying developmental disability in addition to the mental health diagnosis. And the disability must manifest. That means you must see the symptoms or the signs or the condition before age 22, and it must be something that's likely to continue indefinitely. So if someone has a short-term disability, break your legs or something like that, that would not be a developmental disability. It has to be something that is likely to continue indefinitely. Okay, so what is a qualifying developmental disability? I put a list of all the ones that are listed that the county board takes a look at when they're trying to determine whether you have a qualifying developmental disability. There are lots on here, and I actually have 2 pages of that. The diagnosis must be made by a qualified professional, which is usually a doctor or a psychologist. But you can see on our website and on the PowerPoint that there's a long list of options in terms of what's a qualifying diagnosis. ADHD, AIDS, cancer, cerebral palsy, autism, and then we have a whole nother list, nonverbal learning disability, sickle cell, anemia, traumatic brain injury, Tourette syndrome. So there are a lot of different developmental disabilities that would help you to qualify for DD services. I do want to point out here, though, that this is not an exclusive list. So there could be other types of conditions that your child has that would also qualify them as be a qualifying diagnosis. This is just an example of the types of disabilities that tend to have developmental delay as part of their condition. Okay, so the eligibility requirements. We've talked about the different things that you have to be in the county, it has to happen before 22. But in addition to that, for children age 6 all the way through adults, the county board must determine that you have substantial functional limitations in at least 3 of the following areas. The first one's mobility. Can you walk? Can you transition from one setting to another? Can you position yourself? Self-care is another one, and that's kind of taking care of your toileting, your grooming, eating tasks, self-direction, decision-making and judgment. Capacity for independent living is like household things that you have to do in order to live independently. Economic self-sufficiency, and that's can you manage your money, and that's generally for people that are 16 to adult. Learning, so if you have issues in learning and you have an IEP in school, or you just have a diagnosis of specific learning disabilities, that's also one of those areas that they will look at. And then lastly, receptive and expressive language. So if your child has communication difficulties, either receptively or expressively, that's also one of the areas they look at to determine whether you're eligible for DD services. Okay, so I just want to mention before we go on about those different areas. For children that are under age 3, they may be eligible for DD early intervention services. I put on our PowerPoint a link that kind of explains that process. You can contact your county board of DD and talk to them about concerns that you have if you feel your child is delayed or may have a developmental disability. And what they do is an assessment to determine, pretty comprehensive assessment to determine whether the child is eligible for early intervention services.
Virginia, we have one question. Can children access transportation through their county board?
They can. That's another service that you can access through your county board. I think that it might be limited to employment situations for the county board. You can get transportation if the child has Medicaid. You can get transportation for doctor's appointments and things like that. I'd have to get some more information to determine whether the county board would provide, direct transportation, but it is available for certain situations.
Thank you.
Okay. And then I just also wanted to mention, you may have heard of BCMH, which is Bureau of Children with Medical Handicaps, now referred to as CMH. This is a good resource for people with children under age 3 who feel that their children need some early intervention. So you might want to go to that. Ohio's system for early intervention is kind of statewide. Different agencies participate in it, but these are the agency contacts I think that would probably be best address if you have a child that you think is going to be or is developmentally delayed. Okay, so for 3 to 5-year-olds, the county board, we talked a little bit about the standard. You had to have 3 substantial limitations. For 3 to 5-year-olds, the county board uses a different standard. And basically, they look at what are the child's diagnoses, do they have a substantial developmental delay, or do they have a diagnosed congenital or acquired condition? There are many, many conditions that children can have that are linked with developmental delays. And so they're looking at that. But then the other part of the assessment is if the child is not able to get services, is it likely to result in a substantial functional limitation for them? So they're looking at, do they have a delay or do they have a condition that is likely to result in substantial limitations if the child doesn't get services? The other thing I wanted to point out is that you can also contact your school district of where you live, where the parents live, to see if the child is eligible for special education services through the school district from age 3 on up to 22. School districts can provide all kinds of services. It doesn't mean it has to happen in a school. When children who are between 3 and 5 can get all kinds of services from a school district if there's a determination that they're eligible for special education. They can get speech, OT, occupational therapy, physical therapy. They can get special needs preschool. There's a lot of different things schools can provide, even if the child's not in school yet. So keep that in mind if you have a 3 to 5-year-old. Okay, so I want to go back to talk about this general tools that are used by the ODD and county boards to assess whether someone, a child or an adult, are eligible for DD services. The first one on the list here we have is a CoEd, and that's for children and has a C in front of it. The other one, and that's for children aged 6 to 15. And then there's an OED, and that is for people that are 16 or older. They're just a little bit different, and some of the requirements are different, and you can take a look at what they ask and what kind of questions you would have to answer in order to determine eligibility on those links that we provided in the PowerPoint. Okay, so we want to give you some tips. We get a lot of calls from people who don't know how to apply or have called their county boards and they're not sure what to do or what to ask for. So one of the things that I always recommend is that parents look at the guidance documents, kind of look at those tools that are going to be used to assess your child. Look at them before you go. You will be asked a lot of questions, and it's really important for you to know what questions you're going to be asked and some of the details about why they're asking that so that you have a better understanding of what you need to provide for the county board to determine the eligibility. This is something I always tell people, this is not the time to say every good thing your child can do. It doesn't mean you shouldn't tell them what your child can do, but this is the time to talk about your child's deficits. What are they unable to do without help? What are they not able to do independently? What kinds of things have to be in place for them to be able to do some of the daily activities that we're talking about here? You want to be thoughtful when you're answering questions on an OED or a CoED. On page 13, I've given you a guide, so you can look at that on page 13 of that CoEd user guide. There's like a list of things that the county boards will take into consideration. I always suggest that parents look at those as well because it gives you some important information about what kinds of information you should be sharing with the county board. The bottom line is, they're going to ask you questions. If you answer very quickly and don't put a lot of thought into it, You may get back a determination your child's not eligible when actually the child has a lot of needs. A lot of times as parents, we tend to compensate for our children's deficits. We have things, all set out for them, and we want to say, hey, they can do this, and that's fine. Of course, that's what we do as parents, but you need to make sure that when you're sharing information with the county board about your child's limitations, you need to be really clear about what they can and can't do independently. So some of the things they look at is the frequency of the limitation. Is it something they just have sometimes, or is it something that really significantly impacts them? The effort, how much effort does it take to complete the task? So they may be able, I guess we'll talk about that. I'll show you some examples, but the other one is adequacy, how well they do a task. Safety, can they do the task safely, not hurt themselves or others, and then how much time do they need to complete the task.
Can you go back a slide?
Yes. I talk fast.
We do have one question.
Okay.
So Virginia, you had mentioned applying for services from the school district.
Yes.
What can someone do if the school district denies eligibility?
There's a whole process in place. When you ask the school board to evaluate a child for a special education, they may say yes, they may say no. If they say no, you have the ability to do a couple things. You can ask for an independent educational evaluation because you disagree with their evaluation, and you can also ask the school district to pay for that independent evaluation. And then the other option is to go to due process and prove that they're incorrect. So it's a long process, and I don't really have time, but we do have materials on our website, and there's also information on the Ohio Department of Education's website that talks about the right to due process. You can also ask for a mediation. Sometimes that's been successful. The Ohio Department of Ed offers mediation for families. So there are a lot of different options that you have in order to respond to someone saying that your child's not eligible for special education.
Thank you.
If you have an issue, give us a call because that's something we do every day. Okay. All right, so the first one we talked about, and this FEAST is the acronym, is the frequency of the limitation. If the limitations your child has are frequent enough, they interfere significantly with their overall ability to do the task, then that should come out and say that child cannot do the task. It's really important to be really clear with the county boards what your child can and can't do, and really think about, am I helping them do it, or are they doing it on their own? How much effort does it take for them to complete the task? So if the effort far exceeds the amount of effort a person without a disability would do to do that task or use to do that task, then again, it would be no, they can't do that task. So for one of the examples is, can they walk upstairs? And maybe they can walk upstairs, but it might take them a significantly longer time to do it. And they may be exhausted after that and have to take a nap, or the rest of the day they're not unable to do anything. So if the short answer would be yes, they can walk up the stairs, but that would be misleading. And so you really need to be thoughtful when you're answering these questions to say, well, yeah, but they have been able to do it, but it was what caused them to be exhausted for 2 days afterwards, and it took them 3 hours to get to the top of the stairs. So those are the kind of things you need to really think about when you're answering questions for this assessment. Okay, so adequacy, how well do they do the task? They may be able to get themselves dressed, but if everything's on inside out and they wearing their bathing suit on a day like today when there's snow or when it's really cold, those are the kind of things you want to make sure that you share with whoever's doing the assessment for the county board, because yes, they might be able to get dressed, but it's not done well. And so that's the key. Another example of people that we may ask, can they feed themselves? And they may well be able to get some food to their mouth, but it could take them a long time, or they could spill food all over themselves. And so the answer really should be no, they're not unable to do the task, even though they might be able to do it with a whole lot of help. Okay? Safety. Can they do the task without unusual risk of harm to themselves or other people? Example is can they use a stove to cook? Maybe they've been able to do that, but they have burned themselves several times. They put their hands on the burner. They forget to turn the burners off. If that's the case, then we really need to say, no, they're not able to do that without all of these concerns and safety problems, okay? And then the last one is time. How much time does it take? And we already talked a little bit about that, but if somebody, can they do the task in a reasonable amount of time? If they can bathe themselves, great, but it might take a really, long time for them to do it, then they should be determined not to be able to do that task. Okay, so let me provide just another tip. One of the things that we get a lot of calls about is the county board taking a long time to evaluate, or the county board not having enough information. So I tell everyone, get your ducks in a row, get all your records together, provide the county board with as much information as you have to let them know about your child. So it could be IEPs, it could be notes that you take, it can be evaluations, incident reports, it could be reports from your doctor about diagnoses. One of the important factors is just making sure that you provide them with a diagnosis if you have it, and who the diagnosing doctor is and what are their qualifications. That will save you time, because if you just tell them things, then they have to go and say, oh, did they have someone that was qualified to do that diagnosis, or do they have a diagnosis? So if you have that information, I would suggest that you give it to the county board up front, because that'll give them the information they need in order to make the eligibility determination quicker. For adults, sometimes that is a problem, because the disability has to manifest before age 22, and sometimes we get calls from adults who are 50 and they don't have their school records, or they don't have a lot of records from when they were under 22, and so that can be a real problem in them getting eligibility for DD services. So what if the county board determines my child is ineligible for DD services? You do have some due process rights. You can appeal it with the county board. As part of that process, they have to give you notice of that. You have the right to be told why your child's being denied. You can have an attorney assist you in your appeal. You can question the county board staff. Well, why did you answer it that way? Why did you not put that information I gave you in there? You can ask for a copy.
Look through the records, is that what you said?
Oh, no, I didn't do it in order, sorry. You can examine your records, and you can get a copy of the completed CoEd or OED form, and this is the form the county board uses to score your child or your adult, and you can get that so you can see very clearly why they are denying it. We've seen many situations where families are very surprised about what's on the form. They don't feel like that's what they told the county board, and so that is really valuable information for you to challenge this denial and provide more documentation to support eligibility if that's what's needed. I've also put a link on our PowerPoint about how you file a complaint with the County Board of DD. They should give you notice, they should tell you how to do that, but it's also here, and you can just let them know you want to appeal that decision. That's all I have right now. I'm going to pass this on to Kevin Drew.
Thank you, Virginia. Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Truitt. So I'm going to be speaking this afternoon about services available through the Developmental Disability System in Ohio, and specifically the waiver programs, the Medicaid waiver programs. So in the Developmental Disability System, there are three waiver programs for people with developmental disabilities. The individual options waiver, the level 1 waiver, and the self waiver. So waiver programs provide funding for home and community-based services for kids and for adults. They are alternatives to institutional care in an intermediate care facility or a developmental center. So basically they provide, like I said, funding for services so children and adults can live in the community instead of a facility or institution. So when I say community, I mean for kids, generally that's going to be the family's home. Sometimes, rarely, that is a waiver home, a group home. Not usually for kids, that's pretty common for adults. So home and community-based settings, waiver programs provide funding for services in those settings. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about other services available for kids with developmental disabilities. So many kids are eligible for Medicaid, and any person under age 21 who is Medicaid eligible is entitled to services through a federal program called EPSDT, and that stands for Early and Periodic Screening, Diagnostic, and Treatment. In Ohio, the program, the EPSDT program, is called Health Check. So this, to get services through EPSDT or Health Check, again, the person has to be under age 21. It's not necessary to be enrolled in a waiver program to get services through EPSDT. So that's just important to remember. A lot of kids are also enrolled in managed care programs. Again, that's separate from the waiver program. So I'm just going to be focusing on the waiver programs for my presentation. So the first waiver program that I'd like to talk about is the Individual Options Waiver Program. By far the most popular program. It has the most funding. On the PowerPoint slide, you can see a list of all the services covered by the IO Waiver Program. So that includes homemaker personal care services. That's probably the most common service that people enrolled in the IO Waiver Program receive. So homemaker personal care services generally means helping the person with daily living skills, like meal preparation, personal care, hygiene, getting dressed, bathing, toileting, things like that, medication administration. Some kids have behavioral needs, and so the homemaker personal care aide is trained to follow a behavior support plan. So that's covered by the IO waiver. Something I'm going to talk about a little bit later in my presentation is this concept of natural supports. So for adults, natural supports cannot be coerced. So natural supports is basically, for an adult or for a child, the parent or family member or friends who naturally support the person in their life with whatever help or support they need. So for children, it's a little more complicated, but parents and families do a lot for their children who have developmental disabilities, and many are exhausted, and they're expected to do everything. But these waiver programs are meant to provide support for the child so the parent doesn't have to do everything, because it can be exhausting. Yes, you have a question?
Kevin, we have a question. Can someone have Medicare and still get a waiver?
Yes. Yes. Medicare?
Yes.
Yes. So homemaker personal care services, nursing services is available through the IO waiver, community and residential respite. So that's basically services to give the caregiver, usually a parent or family member, a break, a short-term break. Because again, parents and families are often exhausted caring for their loved one. Transportation, specialized medical equipment and supplies, assistive technology, interpreter services, nutrition services. There's a long list of services available through the Individual Options Waiver Program. So the way the funding works is when someone's first enrolled in the IO Waiver Program, the county board will do an assessment called the ODDP, and that stands for Ohio Developmental Disabilities Profile. And that is a series of questions about the person who's being enrolled in the IO Waiver Program, and what their disability is, what their medical condition is, what their needs are, whether they need nursing services, where they live, whether they have two parents or one parent or siblings. So again, it's a long list of questions, and it's a computerized algorithm, and it will produce a funding range. So that will determine your funding range for services if you're enrolled in the individual options waiver. So, and then that will guide development of your individual service plan, which is basically your plan that describes all the services you're going to get. So if the services that you need exceed that funding range, which is relatively common, you can ask for what's called prior authorization, and you're basically asking for more funding beyond that funding range. The county board is supposed to help you fill out that prior authorization request, and it will go to the state, and the state will decide whether to approve that request for additional funding. And if you are denied that prior authorization request, then you have the opportunity to appeal that decision through the Medicaid state hearing process. So that's important to remember. So the next waiver program is the level 1 waiver. So as you can see from the PowerPoint slide, there's a lot of overlap with the services covered under the individual options waiver. So homemaker personal care services, remote support, home delivered meals, community residential and informal respite, transportation. So there's a lot of overlap. The one main difference between these two programs is there are funding limitations under the level 1 waiver. So that's why the individual options waiver is a lot more popular. So under the level 1 waiver, there is a limit of $6,750 every year, your waiver eligibility span. You can, the services, homemaker personal care, remote support, transportation, those services cannot exceed that funding limitation. And then there's another funding limitation for environmental accessibility adaptations, which is basically home modifications. If you need wider doorways, if your kid uses a wheelchair and you need wider doorways, that's just an example of a home modification. Home delivered meals, specialized medical equipment and supplies. So that group of services, there's a funding limitation of $7,500 per year, and emergency assistance is available if you need funding beyond those funding limitations, and that is $8,520 for a 3-year period. So the level 1 waiver is usually appropriate for people who already have a lot of support but need more services. So it's not going to usually support someone independently, especially children, but it can provide services for kids and some help for families and parents. So the third waiver program that I want to talk about is called the Self-Empowered Life Funding Waiver, often referred to as the SELF waiver. So similar to the level 1 waiver, it also has funding limitations. So $45,000 for each waiver span for adults and $30,000 for children. And some services have their own funding limitations too. So I'm going to skip this and come back to it. So this is the list of services available through the SELF waiver. It's much different, well, not much different, but it is different from the individual options waiver and the level 1 waiver programs. It has homemaker personal care services like the other 2 waiver programs, nursing services, community and residential respite, transportation, but it's more of a focus on behavioral services for people who have behavioral needs, and employment services too. So, but there's also the funding limitations. So if you're a kid and you have behavioral needs, the SELF waiver may be appropriate, but you also have to be cognizant that there are these funding limitations, so the individual options waiver may be more appropriate because behavioral services are also available under the individual options waiver. It's kind of confusing. So another main difference with the SELF waiver is this concept of participant direction. So this is a requirement under the SELF waiver. It's an option under the other 2 waiver programs. Participant direction is basically one of two different concepts within this concept. One is budget authority. So basically the person who is enrolled in the SELF waiver, and this is for a child, it's going to be the parent, but budget authority means the parent basically decides has more authority and more power to decide how the funding under the self-waiver is spent. So you can negotiate with providers on the payment rates to them, for example. The other is employer authority. So that's basically the authority to recruit, hire, supervise, direct the staff who provide services to your child. So that is required under the self-waiver to exercise participant direction. So moving on. So in Ohio and a lot of other states, there are waiting lists for these waiver programs. Again, they're very popular programs, and the system, as is currently structured, does not have the capacity to serve everyone who needs waiver services. So there have been waiting lists for decades and decades in Ohio, and there is a new system in Ohio. So as of September 1st, 2018. So prior to that date, the old system, it was basically if you asked for a waiver, then you were placed on a waiting list. And it was mostly, waiting lists were mostly ordered by the date you requested a waiver. So if you requested a waiver 10 years ago, you would be higher on the waiting list than someone who requested a waiver a year ago. So there were some exceptions, like if someone had an emergency situation or met one of the other priority categories, they could move to the top of the waiting list. But again, generally it was based on the date of request. So all of this has changed as of September 1st, 2018. The Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities created a new rule, a new system to govern waiting lists for waiver programs in Ohio. So I should mention that this new waiting list system only applies to county board funded waiver programs. So the three waiver programs that I've been talking about, the individual options waiver, level 1 waiver, self-waiver. This new waiting list system does not apply to, I haven't mentioned these waivers yet, but there are also exit waivers and diversion waivers. So exit waivers are for people, they are individual options waiver programs, but they're called exit waivers because they're for people, including children, who are living in intermediate care facilities and want to move out and want to live in the community, live with their families. So they would have access to exit waivers to fund the services they need to live in the community. So I also mentioned diversion waivers. So that is for people who are entering an ICF, an intermediate care facility. Currently, it's only for ICFs with 9 or more beds. But if you're seeking to enter one of these ICFs, you would be entitled to a diversion waiver. That's, again, an individual options waiver. And it's meant to divert you from having to go into an ICF. You go through what's called pre-admission counseling, and it basically educates the family. These are your options. If you're seeking to enroll in an ICF and you don't want to, you have access to this waiver program. So the waiting list, the new waiting list system is not referring to exit waivers or diversion waivers, just the county board funded waivers. So the new waiting list system is based on waiting list assessments. So these waiting list assessments are conducted by the county DD boards, and they basically determine what your needs are and whether you need a waiver now or within the next 12 months or neither. So as I mentioned earlier, there were over 50,000 people on waiting list for waiver programs before this new system. And now the state has been, or county boards, I'm sorry, have been assessing all of these people on waiting lists to determine, do you need services now? Do you need services within the next year? Or do you not need services for a while? So county boards have to complete these waiting list assessments for everyone on a waiting list under the old system by the end of this year, so December 31st, 2020. County boards also have to at least start the process, I'm sorry, they have to complete waiting list assessments for anyone who requests one. They have to start that process within 30 calendar days of the request. So again, they have to do these assessments for people on the old waiting list, and they also have to do assessments when someone asks for one. So the assessments, once they're completed, and I'll go through what it looks like and what it's evaluating, people have the right to a copy of the completed waiting list assessment. And the county board personnel, there's an assessment tool which is on our website, and the county board is evaluating, like I said before, whether someone has a need that's immediate and urgent, whether someone has a need that's needs to be met within the next 12 months, or neither. So this first category is called immediate need. So these are urgent situations where someone needs services very quickly. So immediate need, the definition under the law is a situation that creates a risk of substantial harm to an individual, caregiver, or another person if action is not taken within 30 calendar days to reduce the risk. So there are examples of immediate need under the law. One is you are an adult and you're losing your primary caregiver due to unforeseen circumstances, and there are no other caregivers available. The most common way to meet this immediate need category is if a child or an adult has documented behaviors that have been determined to put the child or adult or others at risk of harm. So that could be an immediate need. If the person has significant care needs or life-threatening medical needs, it's another category of immediate need. If you're an adult and have been subjected to abuse, neglect, or exploitation, or if you're an adult or child and you're in an ICF or a nursing home and you basically received a notice saying you have to leave. So those are the categories under the immediate needs definition. And again, it's a situation that creates a risk of substantial harm to the person or another person that action must be taken within 30 days. So it's an immediate, urgent, emergency situation. That is the immediate needs category. And then there is the current need category. So this is not quite as urgent or immediate as the immediate need category. It technically means, legally means, an unmet need for waiver services within the next 12 months. So there's also a list of examples for current need situations. The primary caregiver's declining or chronic physical or psychiatric condition limits their ability to care for you, or there are not enough caregivers available for you, and this means you're likely to be at risk of substantial harm. So if that's going to happen within the next 12 months, then you would meet this current needs category. Some other examples are you have an ongoing need for limited or intermittent supports for your behavioral, physical, or medical needs in order to help your current caregivers and to stay in your chosen home. Another category is you have an ongoing need for support for significant behavioral, physical, or medical needs. You're aging out of or being emancipated from children's services. You need funding for adult day services or employment services, or you're living in an ICF or a nursing home and you have a viable discharge plan. So that's the list of current needs situations. So again, the county board will do this waiting list assessment. They will go through these different subcategories for immediate needs and current needs and decide, do you have an immediate need, or do you have a current need, or do you meet neither category? So if a person is determined to have immediate needs, then the county board has the obligation under the law to take action to ensure the immediate need is met. So in our experience, that usually means the kid is going to get a waiver. Not always, it's not guaranteed, but just in practice, in our experience, usually the kid will get a waiver. So there's also the chance that the county board could say, you have an immediate need, but you don't need a waiver. There are other services that can meet your immediate need. So that could be, there are services available through the Medicaid EPSDT program that I talked about earlier, or there are these other county board funded, locally funded services that we've identified that can meet your needs, and you don't need to be enrolled in a waiver program. That's another outcome of the waiting list assessment. So those are called alternative services. If the county board is saying you don't need a waiver, you need other services, they're saying you need alternative services. So that's not a waiver. So same thing with current need. So current need, again, you need services within the next 12 months. You have to meet one of those subcategories. So if you have current needs and they can't be met by other services, they can only be met by waiver services, then you will go on a waiting list for a waiver. You won't get a waiver immediately necessarily. You could, but you're not guaranteed to get a waiver. You're going on a waiting list. And depending on the county, it could move relatively quickly or it could move very, very slowly. So again, there's these 3 outcomes: immediate needs, current needs, or no needs. That's the first part of the assessment. And then once there's that determination of what your needs are, then the county board has to determine how are those needs going to be met. If you have an immediate need, you're likely to get a waiver, but not guaranteed. You're also not guaranteed to get the waiver that you think you need. So the county board could say you have an immediate need, but we're gonna enroll you on the level 1 waiver, and you may think you need the individual options waiver. And the county board, again, sorry, I'm repeating myself a lot, but the county board could say you need alternative services instead. Same with current needs. They could say, we're going to put you on a waiting list for the level 1 or self or individual options waiver. But they could say, you're not going on a waiting list for one of these waiver programs because there are alternative services available. So if the county board, and this is a very important point, if the county board says alternative services are available to meet your immediate or current need, the county board has to specifically identify what those alternative services are, and those services have to be actually available, and they have to successfully meet your needs. So if the county board just provides a list of phone numbers or websites for different entities or organizations, that is not enough. They have to list the services, and they have to ensure those services are actually going to meet your needs. So that's a very important point. We're getting a lot of calls on these waiting list cases, and things are improving, but we're seeing cases where county boards aren't helping people access alternative services. So we encourage you to contact our intake department on any of these waiting list issues where we're getting calls on these cases, and it's very complicated, and we want to be able to provide you the right guidance, the right advice, and make sure the system is working properly for people. So natural supports, I mentioned that earlier. There's an expectation that parents and families have to do a lot for their child who has a developmental disability. There's these waiver programs exist though to support families, support children, support families to get the services they need so they can stay in our communities, so they can grow and have lives just like other children without disabilities. So due process rights, a very important concept. So if you are dissatisfied with the outcome of the waiting list assessment, you disagree with the assessment of your needs, say the county board determines that you have current needs but you think you have immediate needs, that's something that you could appeal through the Medicaid state hearing process. If the county board finds you have no needs at all, that's something you could appeal through the Medicaid state hearing process. If the county board says you have immediate needs, but we're not going to offer you a waiver, that's another thing to appeal. Or we're not going to offer you the waiver that you think you need, then that's another thing to appeal. So there's a long list of things that you could appeal through the Medicaid state hearing process. Again, we encourage you to contact our office, our intake department, with questions, or if you need guidance, even if you're seeking services and you haven't even requested a waiting list assessment yet, we can provide you guidance on how to prepare for the assessment and what to expect and things like that, and guide you through the process, because it is very, very complicated, and lot of people have questions or just feel overwhelmed, intimidated by the system. So again, we encourage you strongly to contact our intake department. So that's the end of my presentation. I think we have some questions.
So one question was, where can you start if you would like to get a waiver?
Yes, so if you want a waiver through this new system, well, it's not really that new anymore, but as of September 1st, 2018, you have to request a waiting list assessment through the county board. So I recommend contacting the county board by phone and saying, my loved one, my child needs a waiver, and I want to start the waiver waiting list assessment process. I mentioned earlier that for people on waiting lists under the old system, the county boards are in the process of completing all these waiting lists for that group of people, but you can also request a waiting list assessment at any time. So again, I would contact your county board and say you want a waiver waiting list assessment. They have to start the process within 30 days. So just keep that in mind. If you need services urgently, then I would contact the county board very, very soon.
Great. If others have questions, we will try and get to them in the comments, but you are also welcome to contact our intake department at any time. Thank you very much.